We've been talking about passion revealed. Passion, we all are passionate about things in our life. We have some things that we're more passionate about than others, but is your passion in alignment with what Christ is passionate about? Christ is our ultimate example. Jesus is our ultimate example in how we're to live life, do life, respond to the things in life passionately. And so we want to look at his passion. His life was full of different trials, different things, just like ours, different even tests, even circumstances, situations. And in these situations, he responded with a passion, or he responded out of his passion. And we've got to look at that. And as we look at the revealed passions, his passion reveals, as we look at those revealed passions that God used in his life, he uses those same things in our lives, and it's to draw us closer, to build us closer in a relationship with him. Right after the Lord's Supper, Jesus, he brings his disciples together, and he breaks the bread, and he presents the cup, and you've seen the picture, the Lord's Supper picture, right after that, Jesus' ministry leading up to Easter, our celebration, really began to amp up, just the next literally few hours. And it's at that point we begin to see some of the real key elements of Jesus' passion being revealed. And the first is this. I want to give you three areas. The first is this, is Jesus' passion reveals what's worth giving into. What's worth giving into. And this passion is revealed in times when you've got to do something that you know has to be done, but you don't want to do it. In context, parents, when that baby does what babies do, you got to change that thing, and you don't want to do it, but it's got to be done. Okay, so we understand that context, but then there's some things, there's some pathways, there's some parts of the journey we don't want to do. There's some conversations we need to have that we don't want to have, but we know it needs to be done. It has to be done. Jesus' passion in this particular situation reveals how to go through that and what's worth giving into, because we're all giving into something. We give into our laziness, we give into our fears, we give into our excuses, but are we giving into the things that need to be given into, which is God's will? And sometimes it's not something that humanly we want to do. I want to give you a scripture here that sets this up. Matthew 26, 36 through 46. It says, then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane. Again, things are amping up here. The end is approaching for his earthly ministry. And he said to his disciples, sit here while I go over there and pray. They're in the Garden of Gethsemane. Verse 37, and taking with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, my soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch with me. So he's brought these guys in to help him, to stand with him, to pray with him, to encourage him. He's brought them along for this because Jesus is truly feeling this pressing, this anxiety, we could even say, this sorrowfulness, because he knows 100% God, 100% man. He's feeling what's about to happen, and he doesn't like it, doesn't want to do it, but knows this has to be done. He knows what's worth giving into, and in this case, it's the Father's will. So verse 39, he says, and going a little further, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. And he came to the disciples and found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, so could you not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. Again, for the second time, he went away and prayed, my Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done. And again, he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. So leaving them again, he went away and prayed for the third time, saying the same words again. And then he came to the disciples and said to them, sleep and take your rest later. See, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. He says, see, my betrayer is at hand. Well, we know he returned to his chosen disciples, and he finds them. He finds them sleeping, and he goes on to pray. But his passion revealed an example for us. When we're presented in a situation where this has to be done, God's going to use us in whatever it is, and we don't want to do it, we don't desire it, it's beyond our human nature to move into this realm. It's uncomfortable. It takes us out of our ability to control it, but we know it needs to be done. By his example, we've got to give in to God's will. We've got to say, okay, Lord, I know I don't like this. You know how I feel, but God, your will be done. Jesus shows us this by example, by submitting and giving into God. Psalms 139 gives us some insight on this, because giving into God, submitting to his will, is impossible without understanding the Father's presence in our life. And we have to know that. Psalms 139:7 says, where shall I go from your spirit, or where shall I flee from your presence? It says, if I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, which is hell, you are there. I mean, his presence is with us. We have to understand that when God calls us to do something, even if it's something that's contrary to our human nature, it's something that we don't really want to do, but we know it should be done. It needs to be done. And maybe our prayer is, God, send somebody else to do this, and I'll pray for them. Jesus didn't do that. He said, Father, I don't want to drink this cup. I don't want to do this, but nonetheless, your will be done. Nonetheless, your will be done. And I mean, he's praying, he's seeking it. There's going to be times that God's going to call you to something you don't want to do. You've got to understand the Father's presence in those times. You've got to understand who's with you in those times. Psalms 23, 4-6, this 23rd Psalm is one of the most familiar scriptures. It says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I mean, even if we find ourselves in the very valley of the shadow of death, he's with me. The Father's presence, he's with you. He's available to you. Even though you walk that journey and God's always there, when you're experiencing that point of giving in, of needing to give in to something. What's the value? What's the worth of what you're giving into? See, a lot of people are giving into things, and they're giving into things because they're not leaning on the Father's presence. They're giving into things because it's not natural, the path that they're having to go on, that conversation they're having to have. It's not natural, and it's easier to just push off and give in to your own natural inclination when God's taking you into a spiritual thing that you need his presence. Jesus shows us this, and it's revealed in his passion. So Judas, one of his closest followers of the 12, he's the treasurer. He betrays Jesus. He's going to take matters into his own hands. It's not playing out according to his plan or perspective of what Jesus can and should be doing. Judas betrays him, 30 pieces of silver. They come for Jesus. He's been praying in the garden. He's with his three disciples. They keep falling asleep. The time is at hand. Matthew 26:50-56, Jesus said to him, friend, do what you came to do. He looks at Judas, and Judas gives him a kiss. Again, we're reading Matthew's account. There's different details and elements in the gospel account. This is Matthew's. Then they come up and laid hands on Jesus and seized him. And behold, one of those who were with Jesus stretched out his hand and drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. We know from the other gospel accounts that this is Peter, the disciple, that pulls out a blade and slices this dude's ear off. One of the other gospels tells us the account. Jesus reaches down, takes the ear, puts it back on the guy. That's a little intense situation. It's like, okay, faux pas here, Peter cuts his ear off. Jesus says to Peter, he says, put your sword back into its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. He's giving a response in relation to a passion here. He says, do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father and he will at once send me more than 12 legions of angels? He says, but how then should the scriptures be fulfilled that it must be so? At that hour, Jesus said to the crowds, have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs to capture me? Day after day I sat in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me. But after all this has taken place, that the scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled, then all the disciples left him and fled. I mean, this is an intense situation. It's so difficult to submit, to give in to the Lord's will, sometimes in very difficult situations. We want to try to explain away. We want to try to push off. We want to give in to our natural inclinations. And I believe that our lives are much more spiritual than we realize. And in that understanding, we have to realize we have a Father who is there with us. His presence never leaves us. It never forsakes us. We'll look more at that in a moment. But often we think, I know we have no competitive people here, right? Nobody's competitive. I remember last weekend, the playoffs were going on, and people were, making it very godly for their team. And I'm sure God cares about those things, in the grand scheme of things. The creator of heaven and earth, the giver of life, the one who holds all things together, is big into the playoffs. And the things that we think are very important and highly prioritized in our life, in the grand scheme of things, probably aren't that big a deal. Now, maybe your team won and maybe your team didn't, but you're competitive, and that nature plays into many different areas of our life, and it plays into what we give into. It plays into what we think God should be doing, and it affects our perspective. But we've got to realize that in the heat of the moment, following God, following his will, sometimes there's going to be a battle, and we have to lean into what his passion reveals in what's worth this giving into. But it leads us right into the next passion. It reveals what's worth getting over. In this room, there's some things that people deal with that they need to get over. And he's there to help you. You got to get over this. This thing has controlled you. This thing, whether it was from the past, whether it was this person, it was this situation, it was how you thought God should do it. You had to go down, that you had to make this happen. You gave in to God's will, but now you're harboring something. You're holding something. You need to get over it. Jesus' passion reveals what's worth getting over in our life. Getting over something is an aspect of surrendering. If I'm going to forgive somebody, I got to surrender my competitiveness, what I think's right, what I think's fair. I've got to, and it's not for them as much as it is for me. This surrendering, God is there, and Jesus' passion reveals what's worth getting over. He had to get over some things and shows us how to do that in his situation here. True surrendering, something that is given by you, it's not taken from you, and it involves your rights and your image and your competitiveness. James, the brother of Jesus, in James 1:19, I love this scripture, but it sometimes doesn't play out if I'm in my human nature, just like you. James 1:19 says, know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. We flip that around. We're quick to anger. We're quick to speak. I know nobody ever gets in trouble for what they say, right? And we're slow to hear. I'll listen to you, but first you need to hear what I'm saying. That's how we think. But Jesus shows us, his passion reveals what's worth getting over. And sometimes the greatest obstacle of what we need to get over, church, this is a tough one, is ourselves. We get in the way of what God's trying to do. And we got to be careful. Lean into Jesus' passion, what's available. Jesus, our ultimate example. He shows us what it means to completely surrender our will and get over ourselves. They brought him before the religious leaders. They tried to find anything to have him put to death. There were false accusations. There were lies. I mean, nobody goes into a situation in human understanding, logic. Nobody goes into a situation and goes, you know what? Monday morning when I go to work, I hope, I'm praying they lie about me. I'm hoping that somebody misrepresents my intentions. And then when it plays out, you go, oh, good. I was so glad I was so glad that somebody lied about me, misrepresented me, and talked bad about me. That is wonderful. You know, nobody does that. Here's what's crazy is Jesus knew what he was getting into. He knew the cup he had to drink. He didn't want to do this, church, but he knew that was the Father's will. He had to do that. Why? Because that was our only hope. That was our only opportunity for a future. And his passion revealed he was going to have to get over some things. And the natural response in this situation is to run away, to push away, to excuse away, to say they don't deserve it. I'm not going to go through this. They're just going to lie about me. There's just going to be false accusations about me. Well, there were, and it was, and they did, and it was hard. But his passion, Caiaphas, the high priest, he asked, "Tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God." And Jesus replied, "It is as you said." Well, this flipped them out, because they now have him confessing to them he is who he says he is. He's the Messiah. He's the King of Kings. He's the Lord of Lords. This was blasphemous in their culture and according to their religious laws. Now they have him. I mean, if the enemy, if you could see Satan is celebrating now. Jesus spoke and he confirmed. Made them angry. They began to spit in his face. They beat him. Others struck him repeatedly in the face. They pulled out his beard, the Gospels record. And they say, "Prophesy to which person hit you?" I mean, this is bad. Matthew 27, 1 and 2, it says, "When morning came, all the chief priests and the elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. And they bound him and led him away and delivered him over to Pilate, the governor." You know, Matthew 27, 11 through 14 says, "Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, 'Are you the king of the Jews?' Jesus said, 'You have said so.' Verse 12 says, "But when he was accused by the chief priests and elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate said to him, 'Do you not hear how many things they testify against you?' But he gave him no answer, not even to a single charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed." Yes, there's times in this journey, Jesus' passion reveals it. There's times that we're to talk, and there's times we're not to talk. And usually those times that we're not to talk are those times we really want to talk. Lean into it, church. Remember, Jesus is God made man. He's the Son of the living God. This is the same one who has 12 legions of angels at his disposal. At one single command, he could wipe out everything they ever knew or held precious, but he didn't. He could have, in one verbal assault, corrected everything, but he didn't. Because there was something that had to be done. There was a path that had to be followed. There was a cup that had to be drank. And he did it. His passion revealed what was not just worth giving into, but what was worth getting over. The pride, the selfishness. Pilate tried to release Jesus. You know, surrendering is the ultimate act of humility. And in this, Pilate is amazed at how Jesus is reacting, how he's responding and how he's not responding. So he tries to release him. He says, "I find no guilt," and the crowd wouldn't allow it. Matthew 27, 24, it says, "So when Pilate saw that he was gaining nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning, he took water and he washed his hands in front of the crowd." Very symbolic. He says, "I'm innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves." And Pilate, he casts the sentence for Jesus to be crucified, and his passion, Jesus' passion, it reveals the necessity of the Father's will in our life. The necessity, you know, the big question here is, in your life and my life, is the Father's will being shown in our passions? Is the Father's will, the priority of the Father's will in our life, no matter what we think we deserve, what we think we don't deserve, is the Father's will being exemplified in the passions of our life? It's a huge question. So Pilate casts the sentence. Jesus surrenders. He submits to the Father's will. Thirdly, Jesus' passion reveals this. Jesus' passion reveals what's worth going through. What's worth going through. I'm firmly convinced that many of us go through things that aren't worth going through because we're doing it in our own way. We somehow evaluated very quickly at times, I'll go through this, but I won't go through that. I'll go through this this way, but I won't go through it that way. Jesus' passion reveals what's worth going through in our life, and it even reveals how we're to go through things. You know, he was alone. By human standards, Jesus was alone going through this. And it occurred to me that God will often call us to places that take us in areas where it seems like we're alone. But I want to give you a difference here. Even when it feels like, even when it looks like you're alone, you're not by yourself. Now, it seems like a weird statement, but it's a true statement. Even though it feels, even though it sees like you're alone, you're not by yourself. That's understanding the Father's will and the Father's presence for his will. When he calls us to a higher place, a lot of times people around us won't go with us. And listen, that's okay. It's okay. You're still not by yourself, though it appears you're alone. You may feel as though you're going this journey alone. Know this, God's promised he'll never leave you or forsake you. Pilate has Jesus flogged. It's kind of this final thing, and this flogging, this beating was horrible. He leads him away to be crucified. He carries his cross. We'll get into that part of the story next week. Isaiah the prophet, he prophesied about this incident hundreds of years prior. I mean, this is hundreds of years prior. He prophesies about this. Isaiah 53:5, he says, "But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace. And with his wounds, we are healed." I want to close with this. So I showed you three areas where Jesus' passion reveals value. Value of what's worth giving into. Value of what's worth getting over. And value of what's worth going through. I want to look at that. I'm going to ask you to stand. What are you giving into? I mean, that's the big question. What are you giving into in your life? Is it those things that make you look better than you are? Is it those things that make life more controllable in your estimation? What are you giving into? Or is it those things that you have filtered through the Word of God, our guide, our roadmap, gone to Jesus as our example, and you say, God, what is your will? What do I need to give into according to you, according to your passion? I mean, that's a huge question. What are you giving into? Is it your own desires or his desires? And secondly, you know, this idea of what's worth getting over. What do you need to get over? What is, you know, maybe it's this one thing that's held you back and it's held you up, but it requires full submission. If you're going to get over this, I just got to submit. But in the back of your mind, you're like, if I submit, in some way, I'm saying it was okay. Can I tell you that's a lie of the enemy? When I submit something to God that I got to get over, it's not about anything out here. It's about what's right here. That this doesn't affect me anymore. I'm okay. And why am I okay? Because I got God. Doesn't matter what happened to me. Doesn't matter what somebody said about me. I'm over it. That's different than I'm over you. No, you still haven't submitted. See, God's got a plan for their life too. You say, yeah, and I got a few suggestions for the plan for their life. Yeah. You still haven't submitted then. And we laugh about it, but church, 100% participation here, we do that. And it's not right. It's not according to what Jesus' passion reveals in what's worth getting over. Got to submit it. Are you harboring that hurt, that anger, that unforgiveness? Listen, it doesn't affect anybody but you.